Sophia stood in the center of the grand wedding hall, the soft glow of golden chandeliers casting a warm light over the exquisitely decorated space. The room was filled with murmurs of excitement, guests smiling and chatting as they awaited the moment Sophia had dreamed of her entire life. Clad in her elegant white gown, she looked every bit the picture of a glowing bride. Yet her heart raced, not with excitement but with a creeping sense of unease. The minutes were slipping by and James, her fiancé, was nowhere to be seen. She clutched her bouquet tightly, her fingers trembling slightly as her eyes darted toward the massive doors of the venue. He should have arrived by now. Her mother approached her, offering reassuring words that felt hollow. The whispers among the guests grew louder, their confusion barely veiled as they exchanged concerned glances. Sophia tried to steady her breath, convincing herself that there was a simple explanation. Traffic, perhaps, or a last-minute delay with his tuxedo. But deep down, a gnawing fear began to take root. Her best friend Lily hurried over, her face pale and her voice low. "Have you tried calling him?" she whispered. Sophia nodded, clutching her phone as if it were a lifeline. She had called James twice already, and both times the call had gone straight to voicemail. A tight knot formed in her stomach as she hesitated to try again, her pride warring with her growing desperation. Guests began checking their watches, their polite smiles faltering. The celebratory hum of the room had turned into an unsettling quiet. Suddenly her phone buzzed. Hope surged through her, but it wasn't James. It was his best man. "Sophia." His voice was tense, almost panicked. "I don't know how to tell you this, but..." There was a long pause and Sophia felt her heart plummet as she braced herself. He's at another wedding. His own. With someone else. The words hit her like a physical blow, and for a moment, the room seemed to spin around her. She staggered back slightly, her mind refusing to process what she just heard. "What are you talking about?" she managed to whisper, her voice trembling. But the silence on the other end of the line confirmed the nightmare. She glanced around the room, at the smiling faces of friends and family, still blissfully unaware of the chaos about to unfold. Her chest tightened, and she struggled to keep her composure. As if to twist the knife deeper, her phone buzzed again, a notification. Sophia's shaking hands opened the message, and there it was. A photo of James, dressed in his tuxedo, standing at an altar with another woman in a white dress. The caption beneath the photo read, "Congratulations to the happy couple." Her breath hitched and she felt her legs weaken. The humiliation was instant and all-consuming. Unable to stay any longer, Sophia clutched the hem of her gown and ran out of the hall, tears streaming down her face. She pushed past the shocked faces of her family, the questioning murmurs of the guests following her like a haunting echo. The cool evening air hit her as she stumbled down the steps of the venue. She collapsed onto the last step, her body shaking with sobs as the world around her blurred into nothingness. Sophia clung to her phone as though it were the last tether to her shattered reality. The image of James with his new bride burned into her mind, replaying over and over like a cruel taunt. She thought of the months of planning, the promises, the dreams they'd built together. How could someone she loved, someone she trusted, betray her in such a devastating way? Her vision blurred as she stared at the bustling street ahead. Strangers walked by, oblivious to her pain, their lives moving on while hers stood still. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, but all she could do was sit there, clutching her knees to her chest as the weight of the betrayal crushed her. Suddenly, she felt a gentle hand on her shoulder. It was Lily, her best friend, who had followed her out. "Sophia," she said softly, kneeling beside her. "I'm so sorry." But the words, though kind, barely registered. Sophia's world had crumbled in a single evening, and she couldn't see a way forward. All she could think about was James, his smile, his laughter, the promises he'd made, and how easily he had discarded her for someone else. The sound of a car honking in the distance pulled Sophia from her thoughts. She looked up at Lily, her face streaked with tears. "What did I do wrong?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "How could he do this to me?" Lily shook her head, her own eyes glistening with tears. "You didn't do anything wrong," she said firmly. "This is on him, not you." Sophia wanted to believe her, but the humiliation was too fresh, too raw. She thought of the guests still inside, the decorations, the cake, the vows that would never be spoken. And then she thought of James, laughing with his new bride, completely unbothered by the devastation he had left behind. As the night deepened, Sophia sat there on the cold stone steps, her gown now dirted and wrinkled, but she couldn't bring herself to move. She felt as though she had been hollowed out, her heart replaced with a void that ached with every beat. Somewhere in the back of her mind, a small voice whispered that she would survive this, that she would rise above the pain. But at that moment, all she could do was grieve the life she thought she was going to have, the man she thought she knew, and the love that had turned to ash. Sophia found herself sitting in the dimly lit living room of her small apartment, the silence around her louder than any noise she had ever heard. The only light came from her phone screen, where a flood of notifications reminded her of the nightmare she was living. Every tap on the screen brought another cruel meme, another viral video, or another comment that pierced her already shattered heart. The betrayal by James was devastating enough, but the aftermath, the public humiliation and scrutiny, was a wound that refused to heal. Her family, instead of being her sanctuary, had become another source of pain. They didn't understand how someone as intelligent and careful as Sophia could have been so blind to James' true nature. "How could you not see this coming?" her mother had asked, her voice laced with disappointment more than sympathy. Her father had remained silent, his disapproval clear in the way he avoided her gaze. It wasn't just the betrayal that had left her alone. It was the feeling that no one truly believed in her anymore. Her friends, though kind on the surface, didn't make things any easier. Their pity-filled eyes and overly sympathetic words felt hollow, as if they were more focused on avoiding their own awkwardness than truly comforting her. "You're so strong, Sophia. I don't know how you're handling this," one friend had said over coffee, her tone more rehearsed than genuine. The truth was, Sophia wasn't handling it at all. She was barely holding herself together. Everywhere she turned, the betrayal seemed to follow her. Social media, once a place of casual scrolling and light-hearted posts, had become a battlefield. The wedding photo of James and his new bride had gone viral, accompanied by captions that ranged from mocking to outright cruel. "Runaway groom strikes again," one meme read, showing a photoshopped image of James running away from Sophia at the altar. Another had taken her own tear-streaked face, captured by a paparazzo as she fled the wedding venue, and turned it into a joke about wedding disasters. Sophia's name was trending, not as a person but as a punchline. She couldn't escape it no matter how hard she tried. Every notification, every ding of her phone, felt like another blow, another reminder of how far she had fallen in the public eye. People she didn't even know weighed in on her life, dissecting her heartbreak as if it were a television drama, and not the most devastating event she had ever experienced. The nights were the worst. Alone in her bed, she replayed every moment of the betrayal, every red flag she had missed. Sleeplessness became her constant companion, her mind refusing to grant her the peace she so desperately needed. She would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, her chest heavy with self-blame. "What did I do wrong?" she whispered to the darkness, her voice breaking. "Was I not enough for him?" The questions were endless, each one slicing deeper into her already raw emotions. Her dreams, when she could sleep, were no reprieve. They were filled with images of James, his laughter, his smile, the way he used to look at her. But in those dreams he always turned away, walking toward the other woman, leaving Sophia behind, just as he had in reality. She would wake up gasping, tears already streaming down her face, the weight of her heartbreak pressing down on her chest like a physical force. Her attempts to find answers only deepened her pain. She would scroll through old photos of her and James, searching for signs she might have missed. She dissected every conversation, every moment they had shared, looking for clues. But all she found was more confusion, more pain. She couldn't understand how someone who had once professed to love her so deeply could turn so cold, so quickly. The isolation was suffocating. Sophia stopped answering calls, stopped responding to texts. She couldn't face the pity in her friends' voices or the judgment in her family's questions. She withdrew from the world, retreating into the confines of her apartment, where she didn't have to pretend to be okay. Her once vibrant life had shrunk to a shadow of its former self, a cycle of crying, sleeping, and barely eating. Even simple tasks became monumental challenges. Grocery shopping felt like walking through a gauntlet, every glance from a stranger feeling like judgment, even if it wasn't. She avoided places she and James had frequented, the memories too painful to confront. The world seemed filled with landmines, each one waiting to explode and send her spiraling further into despair. The worst moments came when she allowed herself to hope. There were times when she imagined James calling her, apologizing, begging for her forgiveness. She pictured him showing up at her door, telling her it had all been a mistake. But those fantasies only made reality harder to bear. He wasn't coming back. He had made his choice and it wasn't her. Sophia began to doubt everything about herself. Her confidence, once so strong, had been eroded to nothing. She questioned her worth, her attractiveness, her intelligence. If I were better, she thought, he would have stayed. These thoughts became a relentless mantra, playing on repeat in her mind until she could barely stand to be with herself. One evening, as she sat on her couch staring at the blank television screen, her phone buzzed. She ignored it at first, assuming it was another notification she didn't want to see. But when it buzzed again and then again, she finally picked it up. It was a text from Lily, her best friend. I know you're hurting, it read. But you can't let this destroy you. You're stronger than this, Sophia. Please let me help you. Sophia stared at the message for a long time, her emotions warring within her. Part of her wanted to respond, to accept the help being offered. But another part, the part that had been so deeply wounded, whispered that she didn't deserve it, that she was alone in this and no one could change that. Tears filled her eyes as she placed the phone back down, unopened messages piling up as she retreated further into herself. The world outside continued to move, oblivious to her pain, and Sophia felt like a ghost, watching life pass her by, unable to rejoin it. In those dark moments, she couldn't see the flicker of strength that remained within her, the ember that refused to go out despite the storm that raged around her. She didn't know it yet, but that ember would grow, fueled by her resilience, until it became a fire that would light her path out of the darkness. But for now, all she could do was endure, one painful moment at a time. Sophia sat by the window of her modest apartment, staring at the world outside. The sunlight poured in, but she barely felt its warmth. Days had passed since the wedding day that never was, and her heart still ached with every breath she took. The betrayal felt like a weight she couldn't shake, pressing her down, suffocating her. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw James, his smile, his promises, the future they had planned together, and then the image of him with someone else, laughing as though she never mattered. She had been drowning in her pain, a prisoner of her thoughts, unsure of how to move forward. It was during one of these endless days that Lily, her best friend, showed up unannounced. Sophia hadn't answered her texts or calls, but Lily wasn't someone to take silence as an answer. She entered the apartment, a bag of groceries in one hand and a determined look on her face. You can't keep doing this, Lily said, placing the groceries on the counter. I know you're hurting, Sophia, but you're letting this destroy you. And you're stronger than that. Sophia didn't respond at first, her eyes fixed on the cup of tea she had been holding but not drinking. Lily sat across from her, her voice softening. You deserve better than what James did to you. But you have to believe that. No one else can do it for you. The words lingered in Sophia's mind long after Lily left. She replayed them over and over, battling the voice inside her that told her she wasn't enough. The next morning, as she looked at her reflection in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. Her face was pale, her eyes dull and surrounded by shadows. She had been letting James' betrayal define her, letting it dictate how she saw herself. But Lily's words had planted a seed, a tiny flicker of hope that perhaps she could take back control of her life. The first step was the hardest. Sophia made an appointment with a therapist, something she had never done before. Sitting in the quiet, comforting office, she finally allowed herself to speak the words she had been holding in. She talked about the betrayal, the humiliation, the loss of trust not just in James but in herself. The therapist listened patiently, offering gentle guidance that began to shift Sophia's perspective. You are not defined by what he did to you, the therapist said. Your story doesn't end here. This is just one chapter. Encouraged by these sessions, Sophia started making small changes. She began going for morning walks, finding solace in the rhythm of her footsteps and the fresh air on her face. She dusted off her sketchbooks, rediscovering her love for design, a passion she had set aside during her relationship with James. The act of creating something, even a simple sketch, brought her a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in months. One evening, as she flipped through an old journal, She came across a list of dreams she had written years ago. Among them was the goal of starting her own business. The memory brought a faint smile to her lips. She had always wanted to create a brand that empowered women, but she had shelved the idea, thinking it was impractical. Now, though, the idea felt like a lifeline, a way to channel her pain into something meaningful. Sophia threw herself into the project with everything she had. She researched tirelessly, learning about branding, marketing, and product development. The work was challenging, but it gave her a reason to get out of bed each morning. Slowly, her confidence began to grow. She started dressing up again, not for anyone else but for herself. She experimented with bold colors, cutting her hair into a sleek new style that symbolized a fresh start. As weeks turned into months, Sophia's hard work began to pay off. She launched her first product line, a collection of handcrafted accessories, and the response was overwhelming. Orders poured in, and her social media following grew rapidly. For the first time in what felt like forever, she felt proud of herself. She wasn't just surviving, she was thriving. One day, she was invited to speak at a women's empowerment event. Standing in front of an audience, sharing her story of heartbreak and resilience, Sophia felt a strength she never knew she had. She spoke about the pain of betrayal, the journey of healing, and the power of reclaiming one's life. The applause that followed was deafening, and as she stepped off the stage, she felt a sense of fulfillment that no relationship had ever given her. Her transformation wasn't just emotional, it was physical too. Sophia began prioritizing her health, finding joy in activities like yoga and dance classes. The changes were visible. Her posture became straighter, her smile brighter. People who hadn't seen her in months barely recognized her, marveling at the confident, radiant woman she had become. A pivotal moment came when she received an invitation to a prestigious design competition. Winning would mean nationwide recognition and a significant boost to her business. Sophia hesitated at first, doubting whether she was ready. But then she remembered the woman she had been on her wedding day, broken, unsure, powerless, and she vowed never to feel that way again. The competition was fierce, but Sophia poured her heart into her work. When her name was announced as the winner, she felt a rush of emotions: pride, joy, and most importantly, validation. She had rebuilt herself from the ground up, proving not just to the world but to herself that she was capable of greatness. Sophia's success brought her into circles she never imagined she'd be part of. She attended galas and networking events, meeting people who inspired her and who were inspired by her. She bought her first home, a cozy yet elegant space that felt like a true sanctuary. Every piece of furniture, every decoration, was a testament to her journey, a reminder of how far she had come. Through it all, she never forgot the pain that had brought her here. But instead of letting it define her, she used it as fuel, a driving force that pushed her to be better, stronger, and more resilient. She learned to forgive herself for trusting James, for not seeing the signs, for being human. And in that forgiveness she found freedom. Sophia's journey was far from over, but she no longer feared what lay ahead. She had built a life she was proud of, a life that was hers and hers alone. And as she stood on the balcony of her new home, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. The woman she had been on her wedding day was gone, replaced by someone stronger, wiser, and infinitely more powerful. James had always believed he had made the right choice. The day he walked away from Sophia, leaving her behind in that wedding hall, he felt no remorse. He had convinced himself that he was choosing excitement over predictability, passion over routine. He had been blinded by the illusion of something better, something more thrilling. And for a while it seemed like he was right. His new life with Isabel was everything he had imagined. She was beautiful, adventurous, and came from a wealthy family that promised a life of luxury. Their wedding had been extravagant, a grand spectacle that made headlines, showered with praise and admiration. James basked in the attention, reveling in the feeling of having upgraded to a life he thought he deserved. But as the months passed, cracks began to appear in the perfect facade. Isabel was nothing like Sophia. What once seemed like an exciting, spontaneous personality quickly turned into unpredictability and selfishness. She demanded attention constantly, thriving on drama and chaos. She spent money carelessly, throwing lavish parties and indulging in expensive shopping sprees, never considering the consequences. At first, James ignored the warning signs. He assured himself that this was just a phase, that she would eventually settle down, that their relationship would find stability. But deep down, the doubts had already begun to creep in. The arguments started small, petty disagreements about finances, plans, and responsibilities. But soon, they escalated into explosive fights that left James drained and questioning his choices. Isabel was never satisfied, always wanting more, always comparing their life to others. She didn't care about his struggles at work, didn't support him the way Sophia had. Instead, she ridiculed him when things got tough, making snide comments about his declining status and his inability to meet her expectations. James found himself walking on eggshells, trying to please a woman who never seemed happy with anything. Then came the real blow. His career began to unravel. The company he had worked so hard to build was falling apart due to a failed business deal, one he had been so confident about. Investors started pulling out, doubting his leadership. His name, once respected in business circles, became synonymous with failure. Clients withdrew, partnerships crumbled, and soon he was drowning in losses. It was a slow, agonizing downfall, one that he hadn't seen coming. He reached out to people he once considered friends, hoping for support, but they distanced themselves, unwilling to associate with someone who was now tainted by failure. Isabel, the woman he had sacrificed everything for, showed her true colors when he needed her the most. She had no interest in standing by him through his struggles. Instead, she criticized him, belittled him, and made it clear that she hadn't signed up for a life with a man who was no longer at the top. One evening, after another brutal fight, she packed her bags and walked out, leaving him alone in the mansion that suddenly felt emptier than ever. She didn't even bother pretending to be sad. "I deserve better," she had said before slamming the door behind her. James sat in the silence of his once glorious home, the weight of his decisions crushing him. He had lost everything. His career, his status, his wife, everything he had built was gone. And for the first time, he felt the bitter sting of regret. It wasn't just about Isabel leaving or his business crumbling. It was something deeper, something he had been trying to suppress for months. Sophia. One night, drowning in whiskey and self-pity, he picked up his phone and scrolled through social media. He hadn't checked Sophia's profile in a long time. He had avoided it, unwilling to confront whatever life she had built without him. But curiosity, or maybe guilt, finally won. What he saw made his heart stop. Sophia looked radiant, confident, powerful. She was no longer the woman he had abandoned. The quiet, loving fiancé who had once planned a future around him was gone. In her place stood a woman who had thrived without him. There were photos of her at high-end events, standing alongside influential figures. She was smiling, glowing, surrounded by success. The worst part? She didn't look like she missed him. Not even a little. There was no trace of heartbreak, no indication that she had spent even a second grieving over what he had done. She had moved on beautifully, effortlessly. And that realization hit him harder than any business failure, harder than Isabel's departure. His hands trembled as he scrolled further, his chest tightening with every post, every achievement, every moment of happiness that he was no longer a part of. He saw comments from people praising her, admiring her strength. She had turned her pain into something extraordinary, while he had turned his life into a disaster. The regret was unbearable. He had thought he was choosing something better, but in reality, he had walked away from the best thing that had ever happened to him. He had betrayed a woman who had given him nothing but love, and now he had nothing. Sophia had risen from the ashes he had left her in, and he had burned in the fire of his own making. He tried to convince himself that it wasn't too late, that maybe, just maybe, he could find a way back to her, that she could forgive him, that she could see how much he regretted everything. But deep down he knew the truth. He had lost her, and he would have to live with that for the rest of his life. The air was thick with anticipation as guests mingled in the grand hall, their laughter echoing beneath the shimmering chandeliers. It was an evening of celebration, a night dedicated to recognizing the achievements of those who had fought hard to carve a name for themselves in the industry. At the center of it all stood Sophia, poised and confident, the very embodiment of grace and success. She wore an elegant gown, her hair cascading down her shoulders, her smile radiant as she exchanged pleasantries with some of the most influential people in the room. It was a moment she had earned, a moment she had built from the wreckage of her past. James stood at the entrance, his heart pounding violently against his ribs. He had thought about this moment for weeks, rehearsed his words over and over, yet now, as he watched Sophia from a distance, he found himself paralyzed. She was nothing like the woman he had left behind. She wasn't broken, wasn't weighed down by the betrayal that had once shattered her. She was stronger, more powerful, untouchable. The realization sent a cold chill down his spine. He had expected regret, maybe even bitterness, but he hadn't expected this, her complete indifference. Summoning what little courage he had left, he stepped forward, weaving through the crowd, his breath shaky with each step. He had fallen so far, had lost so much, and now, standing in a room full of people who admired the woman he had betrayed, he felt smaller than ever. He finally reached her, clearing his throat, forcing himself to speak past the lump in his throat. "Sophia." She turned at the sound of his voice, her expression unreadable. For a moment he swore he saw a flicker of something in her eyes, surprise perhaps, but it was gone before he could be sure. She merely raised an eyebrow, her gaze steady, controlled. "James," she said, his name rolling off her tongue with a cold detachment that sent a wave of panic through him. He hesitated, swallowing the fear clawing at his throat. He had never felt this nervous before, never been at a loss for words, yet now, standing in front of her, he felt exposed, vulnerable. "I just wanted to talk." Sophia tilted her head slightly, her lips curving into a polite but distant smile. "Talk?" she echoed. "About what exactly?" James exhaled slowly, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "About us," he admitted, his voice raw. "About everything that happened." A quiet laugh escaped her lips, soft yet sharp enough to cut through him. "Us?" she repeated, shaking her head. "There is no us, James. There hasn't been for a long time." He flinched, but he pressed on. "I was wrong, Sophia," he said, the words tumbling out in desperation. "I made a mistake. I let myself be blinded by something that wasn't real. And he swallowed hard, his eyes searching hers for any sign of softness, any hint that she still cared. "I miss you." Sophia's expression didn't change. She merely watched him, letting his words hang in the air, letting him drown in the silence that followed. Then finally she spoke, her voice steady and unwavering. "You didn't just betray me, James," she said. "You humiliated me." He took a step closer, his hands trembling. "I know, and I hate myself for it. But please, Sophia, just give me a chance to make things right." Her gaze didn't waver, didn't soften. "Right," she repeated. "You think there's a way to fix what you did? That an apology is enough to erase the pain you caused?" She let out a breath, shaking her head. "You walked away from me, James. On our wedding day. You didn't just break my heart. You destroyed my faith in love, in trust, in everything I believed in." James felt his chest tighten, the weight of her words pressing down on him. "I was selfish," he admitted. "I thought I was chasing happiness, but I ended up running away from the only real love I ever had." Sophia sighed, crossing her arms over her chest. "And now what? Now that your perfect life has fallen apart, you come back, expecting me to welcome you with open arms." Her lips curled into a smirk, her eyes glinting with something that resembled amusement. "That's not how life works, James." Desperation clawed at him, and for the first time in his life, he felt completely powerless. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," he said quietly. "I know that. But I needed to see you, to tell you that I regret it. Every single day." Sophia studied him for a moment, her gaze searching his face as if looking for something. Then with a soft sigh she nodded. "I believe you," she said simply. James blinked, momentarily stunned. "You do." She nodded again. "Ido." Then her smile faded, and her next word sent an icy chill down his spine. "But that doesn't change anything." His stomach dropped. "Sophia." She shook her head. "You made your choice, James. Now live with it." And with that, she turned her back to him, walking away without another word, leaving him standing there, watching the only woman he had ever truly loved disappear into the crowd. And for the first time he realized he had lost her forever. The sun streamed through the large windows of Sophia's new home, illuminating the life she had built for herself. It was a life she never could have imagined on that terrible day when James had abandoned her. But now, standing in the warmth of her success, she realized something profound. She had never needed him. The betrayal had nearly destroyed her. But in its aftermath, she had rebuilt herself into someone stronger, someone unstoppable. She adjusted the sleek bracelet on her wrist, a gift she had bought herself after signing her biggest business deal yet. The past year had been nothing short of transformative. She had turned her pain into power, her heartbreak into ambition. The company she had founded, a brand dedicated to empowering women, was thriving. Women from all over looked up to her, drawn to her story of resilience, of survival, of triumph. She had become a symbol of strength, proof that no betrayal, no heartbreak, could keep a determined woman down. As she sipped her morning coffee, her phone buzzed with a notification. She glanced at it and saw her name trending. Another article had been published about her latest achievement, celebrating her as one of the most influential women in the industry. She smiled. Not long ago, the only time she had trended was because of her public humiliation, when the world had laughed at her pain. Now they admired her. They respected her. They wanted to be her. James had once thought he had left her broken beyond repair. He had assumed she would never recover from his betrayal, that she would spend the rest of her life in his shadow, a reminder of what he had cast aside. But he had been wrong. Devastatingly wrong. She had not only survived, she had flourished. She stepped out onto the balcony, breathing in the crisp morning air. A sense of peace filled her, a feeling of contentment that had once seemed impossible. She was free. Free from the past, from the hurt, from the man who had proven himself unworthy of her love. She had found happiness, not in someone else but in herself. And yet she was no longer alone. There was someone new. She met him months after she had already rebuilt her world. A man who had not only admired her strength but encouraged it. He had seen her not as someone broken but as someone who had fought to rise from the ashes. With him there were no doubts, no fears of betrayal, no lingering wounds from the past. He had given her something James never had: security, loyalty, and the kind of love that didn't demand sacrifices from her, but instead celebrated everything she was. Tonight was their engagement party. As she prepared for the event, slipping into a gown that made her feel like the most powerful version of herself, she thought about how far she had come. The woman in the mirror was nothing like the one who had once sobbed on the church steps, begging a man to love her. That woman was gone. She had walked through fire and come out the other side stronger, wiser, untouchable. The venue was filled with laughter, music, and the warmth of those who had stood by her when she had needed them most. Lily clinked her glass, raising a toast in Sophia's honor, and the crowd erupted in cheers. She looked around at the people celebrating her happiness, at the man standing beside her, and felt a surge of gratitude. She had built a new life, one she was proud of, and nothing could take that away from her. Meanwhile, miles away in a dimly lit apartment, James scrolled through his phone, his fingers tightening around the device as he saw the headline. Sophia announces engagement to prominent entrepreneur. A love story built on strength and second chances. The accompanying photo was like a dagger straight to his heart. Sophia, glowing, radiant, standing beside her fiancé, looking happier than he had ever seen her. The comments beneath the post were filled with love and admiration. She deserves this. A queen who turned her pain into success. James must be punching the air right now. He let out a bitter laugh, rubbing a hand down his face. He didn't need the internet to remind him of his mistakes. He was already living with them. Every day, every moment, every breath. He had once thought Sophia would always be there, that she would never be able to move on from him, that, at the very least, she would still carry the scars of his betrayal. But she didn't. She had erased him completely. There was no part of her life that included him anymore. He was a ghost in a past she no longer acknowledged. He had lost her, and there was no second chance. Not this time. He closed his phone, leaning back on the couch, staring blankly at the ceiling. For the first time in his life, he felt the kind of pain that didn't fade with time. The kind of regret that clawed at his soul, whispering the truth he had refused to acknowledge for so long. He had let go of something irreplaceable. And now all he could do was watch her shine from a distance, knowing he would never be a part of her world again. Sophia stood at the edge of the venue, looking out at the city lights. She thought back to the girl she used to be. The one who had loved James with everything she had, who had once believed she couldn't live without him. She had been wrong. Losing him wasn't the end of her story. It had been the beginning of something far greater.